Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, can you hit rock bottom in Game 3 of an NBA season? And you're not even 0-3 either, right? That's what this show's about today. The post-game pod from Wolves Hawks on Monday night. It was a debacle. We're going to try and break down what happened, what the biggest concerns are, and what do the Wolves do moving forward. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and it is, of course, a not-so-happy Tuesday after the debacle that was the Wolves lost in Atlanta on Monday. This is, in fact, the post-game podcast, and it's a downtrodden one. We'll start there. Just get ready. I'm gonna maybe react more than I typically would, or have more words to say about just how disappointing, which is a very soft word for I think whatever many Wolves fans are feeling right now. That's what we're going to do here to start the show. First, a big thank you, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Beecken and also at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. All right, so if you somehow walked into this podcast this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're listening, without knowing the result of the Wolves game, well, they lost to the Hawks by 14, which is bad enough, right? Hawks were on a second night of a back-to-back, a road home back-to-back, by the way, so they traveled. The Wolves were waiting for them in Atlanta. But the Timberwolves were up by 19 at halftime. They're up by 21 points in the third quarter. And, I mean, the Wolves played so well in the first half. That's in part what makes this so frustrating and disappointing and all of the above. But it's also hard to, it's easy to forget just how good they were in the first half. And I do want to talk about that later. Like, we're going to get to that later in the show today. I'm not just simply going to rant and rave for 30 minutes, but I'm going to start there. I'm going to start with the anatomy of what was a truly epic collapse for the Wolves. As I mentioned, they were winning by 19 at halftime. The first half was everything that Wolves fans have dreamed of all offseason. It was exactly what you would expect. Exactly what Wolves fans expected and hoped for and dreamed for with this team. Efficient offense, running the floor, knocking down threes virtually every time down the floor. The defense was not good in the first quarter, but it was very good in the second quarter. A spry Rudy Gobert, which we've seen a lot of in the first three games of the season. Another silver lining we'll talk about later. I need to stop using the phrase silver lining. I don't think we could do that anymore. But well-rounded offensively, solid defensively, good in transition on both ends of the floor, and it all came crashing down very quickly in the third quarter. Credit where credit is due, Dejounte Murray was very good, especially in the third. He ended up with 41 points in this game. But the Timberwolves, big picture, and this is so dangerous in Game 3, and it's going against everything. If you're a loyal listener to this podcast, you've listened to me for several years now, I am not prone to hyperbole. I am not prone to overreacting. I'm not prone to the hot take, debate show type reaction. That's not my style, for better or for worse, right? That's just not how I typically roll. But I don't think it's an overreaction to say that this is a very, very dangerous game number 3 loss for this Timberwolves team. Oftentimes, there are no good reasons to overreact, hence the phrase overreacting, right? Like if it's, same old Timberwolves. A lot of times I would fight against that and say, hey, look, it's like, to give a recent Minnesota sports example, like the Twins losing all these games, it's a little ridiculous because it's obviously not the same players. They're like 3 managers removed or whatever. So you could a lot of times say it's the same jersey, but it's not the same team. A lot of times we connect things in the media or as fans that aren't actually connected, right? But at some point they just are. At some point, this is just it's a different way to disappoint, but this version of the Timberwolves is just a different version of the same disappointing Timberwolves. That's what this looks like. And I'm not saying that in game 70 we're going to be saying the same thing. I mean, it's the whole cliche. It's a long season, peaks and valleys. Like, go back last year, how many times did we say, well, this is it, the Wolves, and then of course they give the Nuggets, I wouldn't say a run for their money, but they give them competition in the first round of the playoffs. The first half of the Lakers game, they look like all world, they're going to get the 7th seed and then they collapse, right? Like, individual games, the course of a season, there's peaks and valleys everywhere, and I get that. So I'm not saying that the season's over or anything crazy like that, but at some point, this coach and this core has to show that it's not the same old, and that they are different than what so many people associate the Timberwolves with inside the Twin Cities and outside the Twin Cities, Wolves fans and not Wolves fans. As I said a minute ago, the Timberwolves have disappointed for decades, and every version of the Timberwolves has a different way of doing it. Sometimes just simply not competitive, right? This version, it's like an individual, like remember last year, all the problems this team had in third quarters. They had one of the worst third quarter point differentials in the league. And it would take a really long and in-depth study to try and figure out why that would be. One of the easiest answers is halftime adjustments that other teams are making that the Wolves fail to make. And of course, if you're the team that's losing, you have the more adjustments to make, right? But at some point, perhaps not counter-adjusting or anticipating an opponent's adjustment is an issue. Perhaps at some point, not calling timeouts early in an opponent run is an issue. Perhaps at some point, I'm not calling for a Greg Popovich timeout one possession into the game, sub out 5 guys, put 5 new guys in. I'm not necessarily calling for that. But in a game where the Timberwolves showed from about the midway point of the third quarter on little to no fight at all, why was there not something done differently about the rotation? Why did Troy Brown Jr. not play? I don't think I missed that he was injured. Maybe I did. I don't think I missed that. Troy Brown Jr. brings that edge, that do stuff ability, as I said the other day on the show, and I like to say a lot on this show. He fills the box score. He plays with tenacity on both ends of the floor. He does all of the things that this team did not show in the latter part of the third quarter and throughout the fourth quarter in this game. Jordan McLaughlin, if he's the answer, then there's bigger problems. But like, hey, he was really good in his 6 first half minutes against Miami. The only 6 minutes he has played all season, except for the final minute of garbage time in Monday's game against Atlanta. But a game where the team is rudderless and there's no answers on either end of the floor, putting a couple of veterans in who can steady the team, McLaughlin especially on offense and Brown on defense, might have made some sense. I think this one game is in some ways an indictment on the low points of Chris Finch's coaching tenure. And I have been the last person to lay the blame of this team's issues over the past couple of years at the feet of Chris Finch. And I'm not solely doing that now either. I want to talk a little bit more about that before I flip this and get a little bit, try and find the optimism. I'm not going to use the silver lining phrase anymore. No more. There is some optimism. We can talk about the good stuff in the first half. I do want to get to that. I want to close the point on Finch and some of my bigger picture concerns before we get to that. And then we'll close, as we always do in the postgame pod, with individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. This is, of course, the best. In fact, Monday was what are people calling it? The sports equinox, where all 4 major sports are in competition on the same day, the only day all year long this is the case. But just this week, this month, even flipping into November, the World Series, I guess, wraps at the end of this week. But baseball, start of hockey, start of basketball, the meat of the football season, college basketball starting this week. Gophers, I believe, start playing next week. So it's all happening. Now's the perfect time to go over to FanDuel. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, every day is a Wednesday. I do want to take a more macro look at the first 3 games, if that's possible. But the pros and cons from the first 3 games, I guess. And I want to talk a lot more Rudy Gobert. We're going to get to a little bit of that today, but I think he's been great. I want to talk about the bench unit as a whole, rotations, et cetera. We'll also preview Wednesday night's game against the Nuggets. That'll be Wednesday's show. Of course, we're still daily Monday through Friday, so make sure that you're following, subscribed, wherever you listen to podcasts or watch podcasts, that you are linked up with our show. All right. So putting a bow on the Chris Finch conversation, the timeout usage thing to stop runs, I thought was overblown at times. The rotation stuff, all coaches mess up rotations at times. And to be clear, like, Chris Finch is already the 3rd winningest coach in Timberwolves history, which says a lot, or actually maybe 2nd most. Like, he is 2 for 2 in making the playoffs in full seasons, right? Like, we can't deny that. Now, of course, the expectations aren't simply making the play-in again this year. That said, I think he's a good coach. I don't know what he was doing in this particular game. And like I said a minute ago, I think this game in some ways is a microcosm of the bad parts of his coaching over the past 2+ seasons. The not calling timeouts, the messing up the rotation, the get Troy Brown Jr. on the floor, get Jordan McLaughlin on the floor. Like, try something if nothing else is working. Shake Milton lost some minutes to Jordan McLaughlin in the Miami game. Shake Milton earned more minutes in the first half of this game. And Nikhil Alexander-Walker, for the most part, didn't play all that well in this game. A couple nice defensive possessions, knocked down some threes. I think maybe 1 3, actually. But Troy Brown and Shake Milton needed to play more. And Jordan McLaughlin, hey, give him a shot. When this is down to a 1-possession lead, or you're down by a possession early in the 4th, put J-Mac on the floor. Have him steady things. If it doesn't work, pull the plug. Right? No harm, no foul in that case. I don't understand it. There's still time. Obviously, this is game 3. The ceiling of this team remains ridiculously high. And I would be really surprised if they made a knee-jerk coaching decision early in this season. Now, we know Tim Connelly and Chris Finch have history together and go back. We also know Chris Finch was not Tim Connelly's hire, right? He was a Gerson Rosas hire 6-ish months before Rosas unceremoniously left the organization, was forced out of the organization. I don't think there's a mid-season, and obviously this team could win 5 of the next 7 and everybody's fine. There's a lot of statements out there I don't think Finch makes it out of the season. I don't know. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Tim Connelly doesn't seem like a knee-jerk guy with a decision like that. And as soon as you do that, everything is up in the air at that point, right? As soon as you pull that plug, then is it okay? It's also time to trade Cat. What are the odds at FanDuel of who's on the team, who's part of the organization longer, Chris Finch or Karl-Anthony Towns, right? Now, it's silly because if you had told me they'd be 1-2 after the first 3 games, I probably wouldn't have been shocked. I mean, I think I had them at 2-1 through these 3 games. They were favored on Monday. They were favored in the opener at Toronto. And actually they were favored against Miami too, because Miami was so shorthanded. So I guess, 1-2 is pretty bad. But it's not like they're 0-3. It's not like they're 1-9, right? the schedule's tough, but there's plenty of time to pull out of this. And if I could segue back to the first half of this game, there was a lot that was really good. Like, really everything about the first half was fantastic in this game, except for the first quarter defense. If I could just start listing positive things, let's start here. Rudy Gobert was great. Similar line to what he had the other day in 14 and 13. Only he was 3 of 7 from the floor, but he was 8 of 11 at the line. Had a couple of blocks, had a steal and an assist. No turnovers for Rudy. A couple of nice lob dunk finishes. Had the technical, and actually the other technical for hanging on the rim, which didn't count as a technical towards disqualification, thankfully. But a really, like, I think the word I used earlier, I think I said this on the show, that Rudy looks spry on both ends of the floor. He was really good. Really made things difficult for the Hawks. The Wolves' offensive attack in general, very balanced early in this game. They didn't even run anything for Ant right off the bat, and then all of a sudden he hit a couple of threes, and he was super involved. Had 14 points and 5 assists just in the first quarter of this game. 14 points, 5 assists, and a rebound. I don't think any turnovers in the first quarter. And picked his spots. Cat also picked his spots extremely well. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists for the game. But in the first quarter, he made like his first 2 touches were both, or at least first shot attempts came out of the post. Crab dribble middle, nice little jump hook, one from each side of the floor. Looked utterly dominant. I mean, like, Jalen Johnson was not going to guard him one-on-one. And the Hawks weren't bringing help, and Cat was just going to eat. The Wolves got him the ball in rhythm. We saw the beautiful Cat high-low to Rudy. We saw a Cat lob from the left wing to Naz cutting baseline from the right corner. When the low man stepped up for Atlanta, Cat said, hey, I'm just going to drop this dime over everybody's head to Naz. Fantastic pass, fantastic finish. Like, everything about this first half, the ball movement, the intensity in the open floor, getting back defensively, rebounding the basketball, especially on the defensive glass, but also on the offensive glass. Rudy had a couple of nice putbacks. Cat kept some balls alive. Conley hitting spot-up threes. Jaden McDaniels hit his first couple of catch-and-shoot threes in his return. I haven't even talked about that yet. But Jaden looked pretty good. He looked a half step slower defensively. Slow is not the right word, but not quite himself defensively. First possession of the game, Trae Young beats him to the basket. He doesn't get through a screen. Obviously, a tough play, but something we've seen Jaden McDaniels do dozens and dozens and dozens of times in the past. But he knocked down his only 2 catch-and-shoot three-point opportunities in this game. Looked really smooth from outside the arc. Naz looked great. Shake Milton looked great. I mentioned that a minute ago. Like, everything about this first half was impressive, except for the defense of the first quarter. But the defense of the second quarter was much improved. Like, guys were playing well. Right place, right time, defensive rebounding, all that good stuff. Also, transition defense. The Wolves only gave up 4 fast break points in the first half of this game. They gave up 15 in the second half. And like half of those were Harlem Globetrotter style lobs. Like, it just became embarrassing at some point. But in the first half, let's not lose sight of this. They only give up 4 transition points to a team that wants to push the ball in the Atlanta Hawks. A fantastic start to this game for the Wolves in transition. That was their biggest problem against Toronto on opening night last Wednesday. One of my big keys always for this team. But like, I mean, you look at the stats from this game, and I'll throw these up if you're watching on YouTube. The Wolves only had 1 more turnover. They had 2 more rebounds. Is that right? Did they commit 5 less fouls? Did I put that on there right? No, they committed 5 more fouls. I got the fouls mixed up. So the fouls are flipped. They committed 5 more fouls. But still, like, the only thing that really stands out there on this list of stats is that Atlanta shot 56% from the field. The Wolves shot 49%, which you should be able to win a game shooting 49%, but not if your opponent's shooting 56% from the field. But like, 3-pointers right in line, turnovers close, rebounds the Wolves won, fouls were close, and therefore free throw attempts were close. Like, there's nothing about this box score that screams, man, the Hawks won this game going away, right? It makes sense because the Wolves were up by 21 in the third quarter. But for everything that went right in the first half, The Wolves were just throwing everything at the rim and it was going in. Same with Atlanta in the first quarter, but then the second quarter, the Wolves defense was so much better. In the second half, the Wolves were just missing bunnies. Like Shake had a wide open floater from the left side, just missed it. Ant had a wide open, essentially layup from the left side, missed it. Kyle Anderson missed a bank shot that he normally makes. These shots were just rimming out that we saw go in the first half. And I'm not saying that they simply got unlucky, because on the flip side of that coin, maybe they were just lucky in the first half, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that when things start to snowball, when they spiral, they really spiral for this team. And what I often say about Karl-Anthony Towns and his foul trouble, which hasn't been a major storyline in the first 3 games, I would say is also true about the Wolves giving up big leads, and apparently is still true of this team, this year's version of the Wolves as it was of last year's. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? 1 or 2 things don't go your way. You allow it to get to you. You miss a couple of easy shots. Here we go again. The bench comes in. They can't stem the tide. The starters come back in. They can't stem the tide. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We saw it again against the Atlanta Hawks. Transition defense went away. Offense wasn't functional. Like they just weren't functioning. It ended up just being iso ball again, like what we saw against the Raptors last week. That's what a lot of this was. And then when they got open shots, they missed them. Defensively, it was like they were no longer interested in even competing. So for everything that went perfectly right in the first half, it went perfectly wrong in the second half. There's really no other way to slice that. I want to close with individual studs and duds. That's what we'll do here next as we close out the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Gametime. You should not have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event, even if you're at the last minute. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I am a terrible procrastinator when it comes to planning. I just don't plan a lot of the time. So I end up last minute, all of the above, right? I go to sporting events, I go to concerts, I go to comedy shows, I go to theater. And I oftentimes make the decision last minute, or it's, hey, we're going to do this or this, but we haven't decided until day of. Gametime, though, is the only ticketing app that can give you complete peace of mind with your last minute purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They have all-in prices that show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. You could buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Gametime is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. They have deals right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the best place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's close the show today by talking individual studs and duds from the Wolves' embarrassing loss to the Atlanta Hawks. It's actually really hard to come up with a stud for this one. Come on. I just spent, 12, 14, 16 minutes complaining about this collapse. And everybody's culpable, right? They were all on the floor. They all, I spent some time blaming Chris Finch, but, we could blame Karl-Anthony Towns, we could blame Anthony Edwards. These guys were on the floor. They're the superstars. Even Rudy Gobert, these are all guys that can put a foot down and say, hey, let's not let this happen. Let's not allow this to take place. I really hesitate to pick studs for this game because every single player that saw the floor in non-garbage time minutes is culpable for this complete and utter collapse. But here we go. Studs and duds. I'm gonna do it anyway. Rudy Gobert, really, really good in the first half. And frankly, of the stars, of really the guys on the floor, I think he's probably least to blame. There were a couple of plays defensively that he'd like to have back in the second half of this game, contested, he didn't quite make, but he was so good early. 14 and 13, 3 of 7 shooting, 8 of 11 at the line. He had 11 of the Timberwolves' 15 free throw attempts. Mini soapbox that I was prepared to stand on the show had the Wolves won. I was going to make a point out of this. how did Karl-Anthony Towns attempt one free throw in this game? Like, this is going to get completely lost, and I mean, it should, frankly, because of, well, I don't know, everything I've already talked about. But Karl-Anthony Towns in this game, this is unbelievable. And maybe I'll bring this back up again on Wednesday, because I like, hopefully you're still with me here on the show today and are listening to this mini rant that I have. Karl-Anthony Towns in this game attempted 14 2-point shots. Of those, 12 were in the paint. You cannot tell me that Karl-Anthony Towns attempted 12 paint twos in this game and was only fouled one time. Not possible. It's just not possible. And I think he only made two paint twos. I think outside of that 3-foot radius around the basket, I think he was like 2 of 8 or 2 of 7, maybe. That's unusual as well. Like, it's unusual that he wouldn't make more of those shots. He 100% should have gone to the line more than one time. Not why the Wolves lost. And I'm saying that. I want to, like, I'm waving my arms right now. Like, I know that's not why the Wolves lost. I get it. But at some point, come on, Karl-Anthony Towns has got to get a foul call. That said, he's also got to control himself, and he should have been able to help pull this team out of the tailspin that they spent the second half in this game. So I'll table the rest of that rant for later, but it's a thing we're going to talk about if this continues to be the case, because somebody give that man a whistle. Rudy Gobert shot 11 of the Wolves' 15 free throws in this game. Now, they threw him a ton of lobs early. They did even post him a couple of times. I know they're doing less of that this year, as they should. But the Wolves did a great job finding Rudy early. Anyway, Rudy gets a stud for this game. I really don't want to give Ant one. The line looks good. He had a couple shots late. He was really good early. I mean, like, I have to. I don't know. He was so good early. So I guess I'll give him one. But it's so tough because Rudy, like, Ant, or I should say, Ant is probably number one in the players that needed to figure this thing out to get the Wolves settled down. And he just got tunnel vision again in the second half. He was so good in the first half. 5 of his 7 assists in the first quarter. 14 of his 31 points in the first quarter. For the game, the line looks good. 13 to 21 from the field, 5 of 8 from 3. By the way, he also attempted only one free throw. Less egregious. He shot a bunch of mid-range jumpers in this game, which was the biggest problem. And he did have the 5 turnovers, but 31, 7, and 6, a lot like his first game of the season against Toronto. A little better, I think, overall. But the line looks like he played better than he actually did. Basically, second, third, and most of the fourth quarter. Really, second half, I guess. Second quarter, he was okay. Not a great Ant performance, but hey, what else do you want me to do with this? Studs and duds, right? You could go Nas. He had 1 board in 24 minutes and was a big part of that collapse in the second half because Chris Finch was punching the big man rotation buttons and swapping these guys in and out. And I thought Nas wasn't great during that stretch. Not all his fault. He didn't get the ball enough in the half court, but I can't give him a stud. I'm going to go with Shake Milton for my third one. 10 points on 4 of 8. Knocked down both of his 3-point attempts and generally looked really good in this game. Duds, I don't know. You pick anybody. Pick anybody on this team. I mean, Jaden McDaniels is fine, so I guess I wouldn't pick him. Conley was good early, not good late as the Wolves were trying to pull out of it. Kyle Anderson, nondescript game. Oh, by the way, I was going to get to this earlier, and I completely biffed on it. I had it in my notes, and I just glossed over it. As part of my, like, hey, this was bad vibes thing at the top of the show, remember when Kyle Anderson missed the layup at the end of the first half? The Wolves could have gone up 21 at halftime. They got the steal. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Shake Milton ahead of him, and instead of passing it, Anderson went for the shot, which made sense. He thought he had maybe a half second, not enough time, and so instead of a normal finger roll or dunk, he let go of the ball a little bit early in the air, and it rimmed off. Everybody's laughing. Good vibes. Great time. Haha, we're still up 19. In that moment, I thought to myself, I think I said to my wife, I said, yeah, I mean, they're laughing because they're up 19. Like, it's fine. But in the back of my head, I was thinking, I'm going to remember this if this thing completely collapses in the second half, because that's how crazy this whiplash was. Like, 19 points, we're laughing about a missed layup. And then the bad vibes of last year third quarter collapses came back in a hurry. and this thing got ugly. This was hopefully this is the only one of these we're having, at least for a long time. It doesn't get easier for the Wolves, of course. They go back home for a nice, I think, 4-game homestand. But the opponent on Wednesday is none other than the defending champion Denver Nuggets as the first game of this 4-game homestand. And then the Wolves do have 2 nights off again. They don't play again until Saturday. It's that play Wednesday, not play again until Saturday. And then on Saturday, they'll play the Utah Jazz. So winnable, certainly. They get Boston next Monday, and then New Orleans, who's playing really well early this season, they get them next Wednesday. So it's not an easy homestand. Not an easy homestand at all to go Denver, Utah, Boston, New Orleans. But the Wolves it feels like they have to have a split coming out of it, right? You can't go on that West Coast road trip, 5 games on the road, probably only one of which you're favored in at San Antonio. Like, best case is 3-2 in that stretch, right? So if you go, I'm just doing this quick, but if you go 2-2 at home in this 4-game homestand and 3-2 on the road, then you're at 500. And that's what? It's like 13 games in already. And I think we all thought the Wolves would be better than 500 at that stage. And it's hard to see a scenario when they're much better than 500 when they come back home November 20th. What is that? The Monday of the week of Thanksgiving to take on the Knicks. At this point, being what would that be, like 6-6 at that point? That sounds okay. Sitting here at 1-2 and the way that they've lost these games. All right. That's all I could do on this one. I don't have anything else. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.